Well, Tyler is the Deputy Regional Director for Everytown for Gun Safety, where he advocates for communities that are marginalized in mainstream media conversations around violence. His work is informed by his personal experiences losing loved ones to gun violence. At Everytown, Tyler builds coalitions of survivors and legislators across the South to increase government engagement, supports volunteers in their advocacy efforts, and collaborates with activists across the ideological spectrum to find common ground. And with that, Tyler Smith.
Good afternoon, everyone. Well, my name is Tyler Smith. I'm the Deputy Regional Director for Everytown. Happy to be here with you all today. Today, I will be moderating our panel on strategies to advance gun violence prevention through the legislative agenda. We have four phenomenal panelists today that I've had the opportunity to work with in Texas here. And I'll start by introducing them, starting with Nicole. Nicole is our Executive Director of the Texas Gun Sense Coalition Group. As I introduce you, you guys can come to the stage. I think we may be missing two. We also have Christina Delgado, who is outside coming in. She is the deputy. She's a Southwest Regional Advocacy Associate at Community Justice Action Fund, one of the only Black and Brown national gun violence prevention groups in the country. Next, we have Roger Garza, who is the director for Giffords, the Giffords group. I don't know if Roger's here. And lastly, we have Sherwin Patton, who's also joining us today. Great. So I think we'll just jump straight into it. And I'll ask our panelists, and whoever feels comfortable jumping in can start first. What strategies do you all think works best to engage with lawmakers in difficult times on both sides of the aisle?
Hello? What strategies in difficult times?
Yeah.
every time's a difficult time in Texas. Look, I think from where we stand in the Giffords, right? It's the world of the possible going into 2025. So that is initial funding in a budget for community violence intervention. That's continuing to move the ball down the field on raise the age. That is criminalizing straw purchasers who then traffic those guns into Mexico, right, in a sort of back and forth around fentanyl and gun trafficking, et cetera, et cetera. That's where we stand for first and foremost, and hoping that as we get through this decade, we can use that possible wins, those smaller wins, to springboard into bigger ones and really change the state and save lives.
I'm going to piggyback on that. Thank you so much. So I think one of the main strategies that we definitely need to look at and focus on that we used in last session to be able to get some of those wins is really understanding the experts for each of these priority policies or policy priorities, excuse me. And really making sure that we're putting survivors first. Them being able to come in and share their experiences, knowing firsthand what had happened, how their communities were, how their families were functioning before tragedy, in the midst of tragedy, and to be able to identify those factors that could change the course for another family to not experience what they've experienced. I think that is something that we bring into even our coalition building. I know that there was something that was mentioned earlier about, unified messaging. And I know that Nicole can probably speak to this, but, with both our Texas Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence, which is led by, Nicole Golden with Texas Gun Sense, and then also, utilizing our Texas Invest in Us coalition that Community Justice has with all of our CBI leaders throughout the state of Texas. We have been working in creating that unified message with our partners in Giffords and so many others to be able to really create strategies to bring wins at both the local levels and the state levels. Being polite. My friends here have said great things. It's often hard times here, and some of the things I've learned in the, I guess, 11 plus years of doing gun violence prevention in Texas is there really is no such thing as a small win. Small wins are big wins. Any win is a significant win. And so you really have to look for, Roger, you talked about this a little bit, but looking for like small opportunities, whether that's like the passage of a policy, maybe it wasn't all the things you wanted, but had some of the things you wanted in it, or appropriations for investments in things like safe gun storage that we've done here in Texas, for example. Defining your own success. Maybe your success is not passing any policies that session because frankly, you may not get a hearing on a good gun bill because this legislature won't make that possible. So did we get, lots of people to the Capitol for an advocacy day, which we did with Moms Demand Action and Community Justice and Giffords and others last year, and we can do that again. Are we able to get a lot of youth out, survivors, gun owners, doctors, et cetera? That's a huge win. That coalition building is a win in and of itself. And you really have to just work incrementally. So small steps, sometimes that's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, keep going, and celebrating our champions. There's some of them in the room here today. You have to lift them up because they're doing really hard work here against a lot of big challenges, and we need to make sure that we are supporting them and continuing to keep going because eventually over the long term we'll pass these policies that we need to save lives, but it will take some years.
So the only thing that I would add to that conversation is that we have to do what I would call rigorous prevention. And what I mean by that, when we heard the students up here on the panel, one of the things that they kept emphasizing was the relationships that we had with them in order to magnify their voices because they're the subject matter experts when it comes to the trauma that they're experiencing, when it comes to even the information that they're passing on to one another as it relates to gun violence. And so when we talk about rigorous prevention, what we're talking about is having a thorough approach to how we interact with our kids upstream. And what I mean by that is, like for instance, one of the things I'm passionate about is community violence intervention, along with using restorative practices as a method of being able to get students to disclose to us when they're going through traumatizing situations. And when they don't disclose to us, what that translates into is violence. How many of you all in the room would say that you are either married? If you're married, raise your hands. Keep your hands up. How many of you all would say that you have a significant other? If you have a significant other, raise your hand. Okay. So if you are in the room and you interact, keep your hands up, and you interact with a human being, period, on a day-to-day basis, you have to speak to, collaborate with another human being, raise your hand up. So I'm looking around the room and I say that this is probably 100% of the people in the room. Now, how many of you all, by taking your hands down, listen to the question, would say that you have never had conflict with that person that you are either married to, is your significant other, or is a breathing human being? If you've never had conflict, take your hand down. If you've never had conflict, take your hand down. See, we're learning how to listen at the same time. And so what I'm saying is that one of the things that we can all agree with is that conflict is inevitable. And our children are going through conflict that they don't know how to navigate through. And we need to create opportunities for them to talk to us. And then we have to create opportunities for us to help them. And so one of the things that I'm really advocating for is for us to create spaces in the school where we marry CVI and restorative practices by allowing our students to talk to us so that we can give them what they need in terms of being able to navigate through conflict when it occurs, because it's coming. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes.
Thank you. Our next question would be, as we gear up for the upcoming legislative session, I know that there will be a lot of priorities that everybody is focused on, but to our panelists, what do you all see as the most urgent and most vital pieces of legislation that we should be paying attention to and focusing on during the upcoming legislative session?
Yeah, so there is a plethora of things that we would like to see, but I know that for community justice, but also for myself as well, coming from a community that was the first Texas mass shooting, and knowing that there were instances, multiple instances that we could have intervened, and there were multiple instances where we could have put preventative measures in so that we did not see another Texas mass shooting. So I know that CVI investments is a priority for us. We know that it is life-saving. We know that it is a missing link when it comes to gun violence prevention because it treats the root causes, the root problems that lead these individuals to take that act of violence as a next step, thus creating an ongoing cycle, especially in communities of color like mine. So I know that that is going to be one of the main priorities that we have alongside supporting our survivors, supporting the Uvalde families in their asks to raise the age. So I'll let other folks talk, whoever wants to. You want to go next?
Yeah, sure. And those are priorities we support, and we hope all our coalition partners, many of whom are in the room, are going to support them as well. We've been doing a lot of work to try to get all our coalition partners kind of coalesced around a few priorities that we see as really critical. That does not, there's a lot of critical policies. Texas needs to expand background checks on all gun sales, for example. Texas doesn't have an extreme risk protection order or a red flag law. Like, those are all things we all have our eye on and need to keep our eye on over the long term. But in the short term, we're looking at some of the policies that we need to respond to major tragedies that have recently happened. And I concur with Christina that we are 100% committed to supporting the survivors and families from Uvalde and continuing to push for the Raise the Age legislation. We got a hearing last session, as you guys know, and it was mostly due to their credit, and we were all happy to support them. There was a bipartisan vote in committee on that bill, and so regardless of what happens next session, we want to keep the drum beating on that policy. It's supported by most Texans, including 68% of Republican primary voters who were polled not long ago. So it's totally in step with Texans. Also, safe gun storage is a really important priority for us and for a lot of our partners. We've done a lot of work with safe gun storage already, particularly in the way of education. And I know there are other safe gun storage advocates in the room who do great work, like Lisa, passing out gun locks and giving literature across the community. We've been working on on the policy side to make sure that Texas has some policies written to get that education out there. And we've actually been successful. So now safe gun storage material is going out through K through 12 schools to parents and guardians. We're working on implementation of the policy. Implementation is something we don't always talk about. After passage, you've got to make sure the policy is working, and that takes a lot of work too, which is why the advocates on the ground, excuse me, are so important. And then we're going to have to play defense, and that's a priority in and of itself. And so, like last session, there were about 300 gun bills filed. Might be able to anticipate the same number this time, but we'll be looking and tracking when the time comes. And a lot of them are problematic, and we need to really have a big showing of all of our partners to say, we've got to stop this. This is totally out of step and dangerous for Texans. So that'll take a lot of our energy too.
So I'm going to continue along with the policies. I agree with all of that. And I just want to keep pressing home the point of the relationships. So I spoke a few moments ago about the rigorous prevention, but also there's has to be what we call rapid responses. And what I mean by that is when we're responding rapidly, it's not just in terms of how we run in when the crisis has occurred, but how do we, as a response, make sure that we're taking care of those who have been traumatized, whether they were either there or they heard about the incident, they're traumatized. And one of the things that we focus on a lot with the community violence intervention work that we're doing is not only what's happening within the institutions, like what's happening in the schools, that's important, but we also have to look at the violence that's happening outside of those schools. And are we really looking at that data and seeing how communities outside of the schools are being impacted by violence? And I'll give you just a short story about that. We have some of our credible messengers here who are part of the boots on the ground doing work out in the communities. And if y'all would, yeah, Mike and Retanya, both of y'all, Mike Salazar and Retanya, y'all should give them a hand of applause. But one of the things that happened was there was a child. I don't want to give the age away because I'll give away the story, but he was killed, and he was killed by other teenagers. And in that happening, they were in the community where these individuals lived. Of course, they go to schools, right? But they were in the community where these individuals lived and found out that there were threats still going on out in the community. So they're trying to prevent the violence out in the community. Are we measuring how often these issues are happening in the community that's spilling over into our schools? Are we looking at what happens in our schools and then going back and seeing if there's ways that we can serve those communities? And so I think we have to marry the two with policy and understand that a lot of this work is about relationships, because relationships is what causes the harm. When relationships are broken, then oftentimes people violate one another because that's a tool that they've learned to use to settle their differences. And so we can talk about policy all day long, but if we don't align that with real people that are out there doing the work and who know the people who are involved in the conflicts, then we're going to be challenged. So I would say that one of the things I would advocate for is making sure that there is real tangible dollars, money invested in sending people out to the streets that have the credibility to be able to intervene before we see an egregious act happen in our schools.
I don't have much more to add on the policy side. I think we're all lockstep here. What I will double click on is what Nicole said about doing the work that we can to stop these bad bills, these hundreds of bills that are filed every year. And they are, at this point, so many of them are small and insidious. Like there was a bill that got through pretty far last year that when you want to become a foster parent, they make you put down how many guns you have, right? It's a question on your form. And folks want to take that away. They want to bar, DFBS from asking that question moving forward. That's just sort of the bills that we see, and there's 299 more of them like that here as we move forward.
Yeah, that brings me to our next question. I think we all have worked in Texas politics or in places that make it very difficult to legislate on specifically this issue. But as we face gridlock in today's current political climate, what advice would you give to our advocates here in the room today to help them keep up the faith when they're pushing for legislation, and how they could fight for legislation so they don't see as many setbacks on their issues?
Yeah, I'll definitely go on that, or start off on that. I go back to the youth panel, which was just absolutely incredible. And it brings me to my own daughters and the promise that I made to them on May 18th, as we were listening to the names of kids we knew, families we knew, who were gone, who we lost in the art rooms as a 17-year-old got access to his father's firearms and took those lives. And making that promise to do whatever I could to ensure that they were safe and that their futures were secure. And that when I eventually have grandkids, not anytime soon, my oldest is right here, that they can feel protected. And that, I think, is what we have to stand on, is looking at these young people and understanding that we have the power to protect them. Every step we take into this Capitol, every email that we send, every phone call that we make, every message that we leave, every social media post that we post is one step in the right direction in securing their safety. And it's not going to come easy. This is definitely not a sprint. It is probably one of the longest marathons, and I hate running, but I'm on it. And I think that that is something that I want everyone to hold on to, and to look at those young people around you, your own children, nieces, nephews, and the future, to understand that we have the power to make that change for them.
Oh, good one. I think I might have given a lot of this advice when I spoke first about, celebrating every win and defining your own, making your own definition of success and working incrementally and all that. So I won't repeat myself, but um, I will say that, 11 plus years of doing this work, it's easy to feel pretty despondent and like look around and, think that you're seeing much change, especially because tragedies keep happening. And we become distraught so often that it is hard to see that things are moving forward. But when I started this work, and if I know there are others in this room been doing it as long as I have, or maybe longer, there wasn't much talk about the issue publicly at all. There weren't a lot of lawmakers prioritizing it. There weren't candidates running on it. It was much more hush hush. People were uncomfortable talking about it. And we have seen such tremendous change happen. And that's because advocates have not let up and survivors have not let up, and we have supported them. And so I guess I would just say, look at where we were then and see how much we've all done. And you can imagine in a decade from now, how much more we will have done. Yesterday, I was at the White House, and the president signed executive orders that to make active shooter drills in schools more trauma informed, which is something we've heard a lot of from our education partners and students. To work to curb the crisis with ghost guns and with Glock switches, which was actually a bill that a Republican led last session here that didn't pass. It has bipartisan support, and they're working on this at the federal level. And so that's just a few of the things. And CVI investments, huge piece of the executive orders. Having champions at the highest level of office and a national office of gun violence prevention working to make sure all of this happens is significant. So just really recognize those wins and don't give up.
I think Nicole is totally right here. Like having work successions in this building, you get lost in the minutia in the day to day. Oh, my bill didn't get a hearing this week. Our deadline's next week. Our legislative agenda has failed, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, can we do something to put it on an amendment? It can get really hard, right? But 15 years ago, when I was trying to get candidates elected to work in here, you weren't trying. You were trying to get the NRA's endorsement, or at least the B rating, because you knew the other side was just going to bash you over the head with it over and over again. And we're not there anymore. We just endorsed half a dozen state legislative candidates today, and they are nowhere near attempting to, get the NRA's endorsement or rating moving forward here. And so it is about taking the long view. It's about having a good perspective and scope on you here, because if you only concentrate on day 1 through 140, you will inevitably be distraught. There will be those dark days. It's about the other 600 days in that 2-year period too, where you can organize, you can talk with survivors, you can bring them in here to do good work.
Well, I want to encourage you and thank you for even being in the room and listening, because that's the first step to doing anything, is being willing to listen and then deciding to be a participant in making change happen. And so I just want to give you some tangible things that I want to encourage you all to do as you talk to your constituents. First, when we think about expanding cities' investment in CVI initiatives, it's critical in life saving. As I just spoke about a few moments ago, rapid responses are very important. One of the things we had the privilege of doing, and unfortunate privilege of doing, was responding after the tragedy with the Round Rock shootings. It was CVI workers that responded, and they were doing two things. It was, one, cognitive behavioral theory, what cognitive behavioral theory is people who do not necessarily have the credentials, but they do have the relationships to create a space where people can begin to think differently about how they handle the trauma by not retaliating. And then we had what we call CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, where we had therapists that were in the room. And Christina was here as a part of that, that had the credentials to be able to help people to navigate what they were experiencing. Now, we were working with the people who had been directly impacted by the violence, and we worked with some of those that actually were part of inflicting that harm. And so when you think about the cost that it takes in order for us to make this kind of difference, let's think about it in terms of the population of Austin. So Austin, the greater Austin area, not just Austin proper, is approximately 2,115,000, let's say. Now, 1% of city's population is regularly exposed to gun violence, so that's about 21,153 people, let's say that. And then 3% of that 1% are responsible for most of the gun violence. So that's roughly about 638 people who are ultra high risk individuals. So when you think about that, then really we can tackle this problem. So you have two organizations. I represent Life Anew Restorative Justice, but we're partnered with an organization called Jail to Jobs, and we both do this CVI work. And so we have seen that it takes approximately $30,000 of services and support for each person who is high risk. And so if you multiply that, if you take 289 times 30,000, you're looking at about $8,676,000. Now, if you want to look at the return on your investment, what you're saving is $1.2 million in costs per homicide. If you multiply that by 75 homicide, the projected 75 homicide victims. Now, I'm going to stop there. For you all that are part of the legislative branch, you all can help us by going back and advocating. And I'm thanking you all for listening. And then at the same time as I'm thanking you all for listening, I'm asking you to go back and advocate for us to have more people who are able to do this work across our community. Because if we get that, when we get that, then we'll be able to come back and look at these numbers next year and say Austin doesn't have just a 42% drop in violent crime, gun violence specifically. That's what the data is right now, 42% drop. Next year, maybe we'll be saying that there's a 75, 80% drop. But what we need to do is make sure that that money that Biden has chosen to give that executive order for, when it comes down to the state level, you all advocate for that to make sure that it comes down to the local level and make sure that you're advocating just as much for at the local level for it to come down to those who are the boots on the ground people who are making the difference. We need you all's voice. And so I want to thank you all for being in the room and advocating the way that you have. And I want you to continue to support us because we're going to support you as you support us. We thank you because you're saving lives, literally.
I think that was a really great transition into my next question. As we look forward to November, over 3 million new registered voters in here in Texas, which to me means the political landscape and climate of Texas is on a changing trend. If we look 5 years from now, how would you all see the political and legislative landscape here in Texas? And what gun violence prevention bills or policies would you like to see enacted within that change of the next 5 years?
I mean, I think, 29 going into 2030 for us, I'd love to see another 10 dozen more gun safety champions in the legislature, minimum to begin with here. And that means that we are doing the work and organizing and getting everything done in between now and then. It just doesn't happen magically, right? And so, as I said earlier, right, the wins we have next year through the end of May, we're just continuing to build on that, right? And it's also not like we go from 0 more gun safety champions now to 12 in 2029 and only then, right? It's a gradual, what I have seen in my time here at the legislature is when the margins are closer, more people do business because they have to go home and they have to talk to their folks about why they did or didn't get stuff done. They have to moderate themselves to move forward. And what we know across the board, and Nicole said this, is across the board, Texans are overwhelmingly with us on gun safety, right? And so as we get this chance to do and add more gun safety champions to there, I would expect to see more movement. For all intents and purposes, for me, this election's over. We're 40 days away. It's like something you're driving a car and something's 10 feet in front of you. It's gone. But 26 is just around the corner, and we've got all the statewides up in 26, and hopefully we can start making some movement then.
I know I would definitely like for, and I hope that we can not have to wait 5 years for this, but for gun violence to be addressed as the public health crisis that it truly is, so that we can get sensible, humanistic policies put in place, so that we can save lives and we can support those who've been directly impacted. So we can break the cycles and sustain that peace in communities, not just communities of color, but across the entire state. And, that is going to be something that we're going to have to get creative with. Even if this election, God willing, does not go in the way that we want it to, but we can be creative in how we are having these conversations. We can be creative in how we are reaching these decision makers at all levels of government. I just hope it doesn't take us 5 years to do that.
Excuse me. Just somewhat repeating what I've already said, but to put it more plainly, I think within 5 years, I do want to see that raise the age bill get over the finish line. I want to see policies that require safe and secure storage of firearms. We've done some great work with education, as I mentioned, but we really need to be holding adults accountable to securing their firearms and not making them accessible to youth, to curb our firearm suicide crisis, to prevent school shootings and unintentional shootings. And I think I can't predict the future. It may be possible within those years to do some of these things. We're definitely going to try. And then I also just, Tyler, you asked earlier about bipartisan approaches. I don't ever want to really undervalue the power of education as a bipartisan approach, and making sure that people at all levels of lawmakers at all levels of leadership and at all levels of office, but also just Texans across our state are educated about the issue. I feel like sometimes I take for granted what I know and what I've done, but a lot of people are still learning about it. And they may be people who we don't fully agree with, but they need more education. So I would like to see more Texans and leaders educated about the issues as well. And I absolutely think that's in our power to control.
The only thing I'd add to that is I would like to see in 5 years that we are really taking an ecosystem approach to addressing this gun violence epidemic that we're facing right now in our country. And what I mean by that is that with bipartisan support, that we're making sure that we're having hospital interventions that are going on, so that there's work being done to prevent retaliation from the hospital, that there's work being done in our schools, that there's even work being done not only in the government and city governments, but also being done in terms of how those governments relate to our communities, listening to the needs. I would like for us to take an ecosystems approach to that, and within the next 5 years, make sure that the right hand knows what the left hand is doing. Because oftentimes what we're looking at when it comes to violence, it really came down to a matter of communication. Someone did not communicate with someone else about what was going on with an individual. And if we look at the tragedy that should not have happened in Uvalde, there was a huge breakdown in communication with what was going on with this young man's mental health that cost the lives of children and traumatized an entire nation. And so what we need is an ecosystems approach. And we need to, as the people in the room that are smart enough to do this, find out how we can put down our political agendas to be able to come together and say that it doesn't matter whether you're from the far right, the left, or in the middle, that we're going to work together in order to make sure that this does not continue to happen.
With that, I think we'll open it up to the crowd if anyone has any questions.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your good information. The question I have is, do any of your organizations do anything to provide information around how the elected officials here in Texas, how they are either proposing or voting on bills related to gun violence? Because the average person doesn't necessarily have the time to do all the research to know. And we talk about trying to change laws, and it matters who's in the seats to get the laws changed. And as long as we have gerrymandering, now that's a whole nother issue. But how do you all help get the word out for individuals to kind of easily see how the person who represents them stands and how they have voted on specific bills or even proposed bills that they may be for or against?
I love your question. This is something, excuse me, that our team has been talking about, and we've been working on putting together a tool that we're working to get it up on our website that just as a nonpartisan tool will tell people sort of like, exactly what you're asking for, what the history of their votes are. What's a little bit hard in Texas is that good gun bills don't usually get a hearing, and there's not a lot of votes on record. That's part of our political problem, is that there's this avoidance to get lawmakers on record on their votes when it comes to gun safety legislation. But we're going to kind of look at it broadly as much as we can to show you, so you can look up your lawmaker, see what they've done, and get a sense of what they believe in and where their actions are. And we also, at the same time, though, all of our work is nonpartisan, we encourage people to go to candidate forums and things like that and ask the questions. Where do you stand on this? What are your intentions? Because voters 100% deserve to know that information. So anyway, I'm happy to give you my card and kind of let you know when that might be available. Others might have something to add.
Yeah, Giffords, Texas is all of 7 months old here. So we have not, advocated or been in any previous session. Moving forward, what is definitely on the table for us is some sort of scorecard, right? Very easy to do. I think the question, the other thing for us on the flip side of that as we get into November is we just endorse 6 candidates. They're gun safety champions, right? These are folks who we've interacted with, we've spoken with. A couple of them are incumbents themselves. And so I think as we merge those two together here moving forward, that will be on our website, giffords.org, and we'll be able to kind of make sure that folks have all the opportunities to get that information.
For community justice, we're a C3 first, and then a C4 last. So we don't do a lot of endorsements for candidates or anything like that. However, for our local municipalities, we do have something that we launched, which is the Violence Prevention Index, or the VPI Index, which is a national analysis of municipalities' program services and policies designed to reduce gun violence and other forms of violence. So it assesses over 100 cities in 3 categories: intervention, risk factor reduction, addressing the root causes of violence, and local offices of violence prevention, which can kind of help you to assess what's going on in your local districts within your cities across Texas, but also be able to get an example of how other states, how other leadership in other cities are looking at this as an issue, and what steps they are taking or not taking in order to resolve the issue.
So at the church that I attend, they're going to have, starting on Sunday, this 4-week class on how to respectfully disagree with someone. And I'm fairly sure that their ultimate reason behind doing this in church is so that half of the congregation doesn't leave. If the other half is rubbing their face in whatever happens in the election. And that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. So what I did when I saw that this was coming up is I decided I would test it myself, and the gym where I work out is a guy who's about the extreme opposite of me on both gun safety and political. And he and I have become good friends because we listen to each other. We don't poo-poo whatever somebody's putting out there. We listen to each other. And is there any other experience of that sort that you know of?
You know, something that I heard said once in conversations that we've had is, you know, you cannot combat violence with a violent debate. We have to be able to have conversations, lay everything on the table, and find common ground because at the end of the day, we're all human beings. We all live in the same communities. We all breathe the same air. We all shop at the same HEB. We have to be able to come together to find a solution. Going on separate sides, that middle, that gray area, is where the violence will continue, where the pain will continue, the tragedy, those cycles. And so I'm glad that your church is having that kind of conversation. And those are the kinds of conversations we need to be having in this capital, is being able to go into those offices of those legislators, those decision makers who don't always agree with us, who might not even want us to come in. But that is where those conversations have to be. They have to start. And I know Representative Goodwin, thank you for all of the work that you do, because I know that you have to have those very difficult conversations every day in this room. But that's how we come to solutions.
And I can add just one thing. I think I had a very interesting meeting with some of our Moms Demand volunteers with a junior senator from Texas who we don't agree on probably anything. But I think I was more open and receptive to him because he took that meeting knowing that he was going to get bombarded and be wrong the entire meeting. And I think that like dialogue and open dialogue, whether you agree or you disagree, is always a good thing to have. So.
Okay. Hi. I know that we've talked a lot about different legislative priorities, and a lot of students are super on board with these priorities as well. And I guess my question is, outside of Texas Advocacy Day, which I'm super excited to attend, by the way, but outside of that, what are different ways that students and youth and other stakeholders can get involved in moving forth legislation and being catalysts for meaningful policy change outside of things like large organized events like Advocacy Day?
I love Serena, that's a great, I love that. We've spent, I think you know this, you should know, we spent a lot of time at Texas Gun Sense talking about how to have some more youth-centered programming. And really, some of the feedback I've heard from students, some of you guys are in the room, is that it's really important that students aren't feeling like they're just being kind of told what to do and pedaled out at certain times. And we've taken that really seriously and tried to lift up student voices in their own right and the leader, their ideas and their leadership. So like there's a special, for Advocacy Day that you mentioned, there's like a youth subcommittee that is doing awesome work, and we want them to lead on that. We're also looking at more permanent programming within Texas Gun Sense that will work with students largely at the college level, but not necessarily only. To help them co-create together tools for them to be advocates all year long. You're right, Advocacy Day is incredible, but it is one day. We need to be doing that work all year long to talk to lawmakers, to talk to one another about the issues and prepare for legislative sessions. And so we're looking at ways to do that so that there's like a real student movement that hopefully is created here in Texas and can stay, and building some infrastructure around it to kind of, help students plug in.
So one of the things that we do, we have what's called student ambassadors, and Sean Oliver is who's back in the back of the room. If you can raise your hand up. So Sean actually helps lead this along with others of ambassadors. And the student ambassadors, what they're doing is they're learning how to advocate while at the same time learning how to share their stories from what they're experiencing on the campus. And they also serve as people who are peacemakers on those campuses. The reason why I bring that to your attention is because we're right here in Travis County in Austin Independent School District. And I heard you say that you go to Austin High, right? So we're on several campuses in the city, but we're not on Austin High's campus. And the reason why is because it's not at the top of our radar when it comes to the data. And they say these are the schools that are most at risk for violence to occur. Austin High is not there. But your voice is in this room. And so what I'm going to say is Sean is going to connect with you because we need to have you as a student ambassador at Austin High, bring other students into the equation, and we'll bring in partners like community justice and other people who know how to advocate so you can learn while learning how to share your story and help other people to become a part of the ambassadors group. The last thing I'll say, the reason why we call it student ambassadors, because for us as adults, we have to send somebody into a foreign land that can actually help us, that can actually represent the voices of those of us who don't even know what to say, right? So an ambassador goes into a foreign land and he represents that country in which he came from. And so you all are actually representing the voices of the people in this room who want violence to stop, but we don't know how to do it. And so thank you for being a part of the solution.
So for all of you youth, parents don't get mad at me, but I need you guys to stand up and move forward. We are here to help you guys. If, just like hopefully our future Madam President has said, now I'm not going to say it exactly how she says it, but if there's a closed door, you bust the door open. Make sure you're wearing nice shoes because you're going to break the glass ceilings. This is y'all's world. You guys take the initiative to move forward. We'll follow you. We might be a little far behind because we're a little older than y'all are, but I encourage you all to stand up and fight for your lives. This is your world that we are going to leave to you. We are doing everything in our power to try to make it better, but we are here to follow your lead.
I think we have time for one last question, and then we are wrapping this up.
Thank you, panel, for sharing everything that you've shared. I work in the city of San Antonio with our Metro Health District, and we have violence prevention, but we work with a program called Unlocked. And within that, we provide services to individuals that are coming out of our Bexar County jail system, and it's reintegration, a lot of restorative practices that are done there. So we're actually on the other side of the issue, if I could put it that way. We're working with the offenders. We're working with the individuals that have been incarcerated. And all of the ones that we've met that have gun charges, they get out, they come home. I also volunteer with a prison ministry, so I'm deeply entrenched in the restorative justice practices. We went to, our community health workers went to a conference in Tennessee. They had peer support specialists, which is a lot of what you guys do. Boots on the ground, violence interrupters, but they're also peer support specialists at this point. So my question, I guess, to the group is, in panel, because you guys have the mic, is how do you connect the dots between legislation and the actual individuals that are living this circumstance, that are going through the trauma, that have gone through the abuse, the neglect, the disproportionate effects on communities of color and impoverished individuals?
So this is the reason why we talked about the ecosystem. So we're in relationship with one another. No organization can do it all. But when you're communicating with the people who are in the ecosystem, then you know who is really the one that should be addressing certain issues, and you support that organization. And so that's the reason why it's so important to become a part of the ecosystem. And if there's not already somebody who is leading out on bringing those stakeholders together, then I think you should probably raise your hand. Raise your hand real quick. You just became an ecosystem developer, because we have to bring those folks into the room. Congratulations, yeah. So we have to bring those people into the room. And one of the reasons why we say this, we're part of both Life Anew and Jail to Jobs, are part of this group called ATX Peace. And on a weekly basis, we meet with other ecosystem partners that do things that we don't do. And then on a monthly basis, we bring together the entire community that represents different institutions in the community so we can talk about what is working, what's not working, and how do we strategize and move as a unit. That needs to be in every city because it was not that way a year and a half ago. We started doing this because of the question that you just asked. We were doing restorative practices in schools. We had CVI workers who were communicating with those who were in school. And so what we said we were going to do is make sure that we started calling our folks in the school credible messengers, and they're getting educated on the same thing as our credible messengers on the streets are getting educated on. And then we started bringing in the school district. We made sure that we brought in the Central Texas Food Bank. We made sure that we brought in other partners that were addressing economic challenges that were going on in the city. And so we have to have all those pieces at the table in order for us to be able to affect change. Because if you tell somebody who is hungry, don't go out and do what you have to do to feed yourself and your family, they're going to ignore you. But if you teach somebody how to catch a fish, then that person will feed not only himself for today, but feed himself for a lifetime. And so that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Sherwin. And to finish off the question of how you take those issues and bring it to the legislative front, being a part of that ecosystem, there's the advocacy part of that, which through ATX piece in that ecosystem, community justice is that advocacy piece. And being able to take all of that data to be able to look at, where did that individual come from? What made that individual lead up to making that decision to engage in that act of violence? And then how do we go about bringing in policies to be able to break those cycles of violence? Very similarly to, Congressman Horsford's Break the Cycle of Violence Act that was filed at the federal level. Some of those CVI, CVI appropriations, the riders, and different pieces that we would like to, that we're working on to try and file this next legislative session to ensure that we have the ability to do the work on the front and the backside of each of those individuals to ensure that we are breaking the cycles of violence in that community so that we are treating the person who was on the firing side of the gun to ensure that no one else goes down that same path, to re-engaging in that violence that they had experienced from maybe that incident or some other incident within their community.
And with that, I want to say thank you to our panelists. This was a great discussion and look forward to continuing it during the legislative session.